The cold November wind had a mean streak, whipping around the corner of Elm Street and rattling the bus stop shelter like a bone-thin beggar. Inside, Sarah hunched her shoulders, pulling the collar of her threadbare coat tighter around her neck. It wasn't nearly enough. The cold seeped in, a familiar ache that settled deep in her bones. She glanced at the crumpled wad of bills in her hand, the entirety of her tips from a 12-hour shift at the Silver Spoon Diner. $17.42. She did the math in her head for the 100th time. The electric bill was late. Her son Leo's 8th birthday was on Friday. And the Starlight Express train set he stared at every time they passed the window of Miller's Toys might as well have been a ticket to the moon. She let out a breath, a white puff of despair in the frigid air. Her gaze drifted across the street to the darkened entrance of the public library. A man sat on the cold stone steps, his form a bundle of shadows and rags. Most people walked by without a second glance. They saw a problem, a statistic, a ghost. But Sarah saw the way he carefully, almost reverently, brushed a dusting of early snow from the shoulders of a worn-out army jacket. He moved with a quiet dignity that seemed out of place with his circumstances. He was there every night, a silent sentinel in the heart of their small Ohio town. He stood alone at the edge of the world, clutching a life most people had already written off, even though he was still living it. What kind of man weathers the storm? Not with bitterness, but with a strange and quiet grace. The next evening, the diner was slow. The clock on the wall ticked with agonizing slowness, each second a reminder of the money she wasn't making. Sal, her boss, was in the back, grumbling about the cost of bacon. Through the front window, Sarah saw him again, the man from the library steps. He was shuffling past, his head bowed against the wind, his gaze lingering for just a moment on the warm, steamy windows of the diner. He wasn't looking for a handout. It was a different kind of look. It was the look of someone remembering warmth, remembering a time when a simple meal in a simple diner wasn't an impossible dream. On impulse, a decision made in the space of a heartbeat, Sarah grabbed an empty plate. She loaded it with a meatloaf speciale, thick slice of meatloaf, a generous scoop of buttery mashed potatoes, and a ladle of rich brown gravy. She added a buttered roll and a cup of steaming black coffee. "Sal, put this on my tab," she said, her voice firm, daring him to argue. Sal emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron. He glanced at the plate, then out the window, his face hardened. "Sarah, we're not a charity. You know the rules. You can't afford to be giving away food." "I'm not giving it away," she said, her voice softer now, but just as determined. "I'm paying for it. It's my dinner." She looked down at the plate, the steam rising like a prayer. "I'm just not very hungry tonight." Before Sal could protest further, she pushed through the diner door. The cold hit her again, but this time she barely noticed. The man was a few yards away, about to turn the corner. "Excuse me," she called out. "Sir?" He stopped, turning slowly, as if the word "sir" was a foreign language he hadn't heard in years. His eyes, when they met hers, weren't cloudy or vacant. They were a startlingly clear blue, etched with lines of hardship, but holding a deep, surprising intelligence. His beard was unkempt, silvered with frost and age, but it couldn't hide the gentle structure of his face. He didn't speak. He just watched her, wary, like a stray animal that had been kicked one too many times. I work in there," she said, nodding toward the diner. "We were about to throw this out. It's the special. It's still hot." She held out the plate. "I figured. It's a cold night. No sense in it going to waste." It was a small lie, a way to preserve his dignity. He stared at the plate, then back at her. For a long moment, he said nothing. She could see the conflict in his eyespride warring with a hunger that must have been a constant gnawing companion. Finally, with a slow, deliberate movement, he reached out a gloved hand, the fingers worn through, and took the plate from her. His touch was brief, but his hand was trembling, either from the cold or from emotion. "Thank you," he whispered. The words were raspy, unused. He cleared his throat. "Thank you," he said again, a little stronger this time. He looked down at the food, at the steam fogging his glasses. "God bless you, miss." Sarah just nodded, a lump forming in her throat. She turned and walked back to the diner, the bell above the door chiming softly behind her. As she wiped down the empty counter, she caught her reflection in the polished chrome of the coffee machine. She saw the worry in her own eyes, the exhaustion etched on her face. She was broke, scared, and barely holding on. And yet, giving away a dinner she couldn't afford had made her feel richer than she had in months. It didn't make any logical sense. Why would a stranger care when even the world had stopped noticing? He didn't come back the next day, or the day after. Sarah found herself looking for him, a strange pang of disappointment hitting her each time she scanned the street and saw only strangers. She started to think it was just a one-time encounter, a fleeting moment of connection in a world that was mostly disconnected. But then, a week later, on a Tuesday night so cold, the windows were frosted at the edges, the diner door opened and he stepped inside. He was holding something in his hand. He walked directly to the counter where she was refilling the sugar shakers and placed it down. It was a small bird, carved from a single piece of light-colored wood. It was exquisitely detailed, each feather etched with care, its head tilted in a curious, lifelike pose. It was the work of a true artist. "For your boy," he said, his voice still quiet but clearer now. "I heard you talking about him on the phone one night, through the window. I'm a good listener." Sarah stared at the bird, speechless. She remembered the call. She'd been on her break, sitting in a booth by the window, talking to the babysitter, reminding her that Leo liked the crusts cut off his sandwiches. She'd been complaining about how she couldn't afford the train set. I can't accept this," she stammered, though her fingers longed to touch it. This is beautiful." "Nonsense," he said, a faint smile touching his lips for the first time. "It's just a piece of scrap wood, but making things, it helps keep my hands warm and my mind steady." He pushed it gently toward her. "My name is Arthur." "I'm Sarah." She finally picked up the bird. It felt warm and smooth in her palm, a small, solid piece of grace. "Thank you, Arthur. Leo will love this." From that night on, Arthur became a quiet fixture in her life. He never asked for anything. Some nights, he would just sit in the corner booth, nursing a single cup of coffee that Sarah always made sure was on the house, Sal's grumbling be damned. He'd read a tattered paperback he'd found or simply watched the world go by. Other nights, they would talk. The conversation started small. He'd ask about Leo. She'd show him the latest drawing Leo had made, usually of a fantastical train puffing cartoon smoke into a crayon sky. She, in turn, learned about him in fragments, like piecing together a broken mosaic. He'd been a designer once, a long time ago. "I used to build worlds," he told her one evening, his eyes distant. "Small worlds for small hands." He spoke of a wife, Eleanor, and the way her eyes would light up when he showed her a new creation. And then, a shadow would cross his face, a deep and abiding sadness that he never fully explained, but Sarah understood it was a loss so profound it had untethered him from the world. He'd lost his wife, and somewhere in the fog of grief, he'd lost himself too. One afternoon, he saw her staring at the flyer for the St. Jude's Thanksgiving dinner. "You going?" he asked. Sarah shook her head. "Leo's dad is supposed to have him for the holiday. He lives a few states over, supposed to send a bus ticket." She tried to keep her voice even. "It hasn't come yet." Arthur just nodded, his gaze compassionate. He didn't offer empty platitudes or say, "I'm sure it will work out." He just sat with her in the quiet understanding of disappointment. He knew what it was like to be forgotten. The bus ticket never came. Thanksgiving morning arrived, gray and bleak. Sarah woke up with a hollow feeling in her chest. Leo, bless his heart, tried to be brave, but she could see the sadness clouding his eyes. She took him to the diner with her, since she had to work a half day. He sat in a booth, drawing his trains, while Sarah served the few lonely travelers and town stragglers who had nowhere else to go. Around noon, the bell on the door chimed and Arthur walked in. He wasn't wearing his usual rags. He had on a clean, though heavily worn, collared shirt and a pair of pressed trousers. He'd clearly made an effort. He walked over to their booth and smiled at Leo. "I believe," Arthur said, his voice gentle, "that a master engineer like yourself shouldn't be cooped up in an office on a holiday." He looked at Sarah. "The church downtown is serving a full Thanksgiving meal. Turkey, stuffing, pumpkin pie, the works. I saved us some seats." Sarah stared at him, her throat tight. He wasn't just inviting them, he was including himself. He was creating a we. He was taking 3 broken, lonely people and trying to make them whole, if only for an afternoon. As she sat in the warm, noisy church basement, watching Leo laugh as Arthur explained the physics of a gravy boat, a thought settled over her, as warm and comforting as the mashed potatoes on her plate. You ever feel like kindness finds you when you need it most? It was the day after Thanksgiving. The diner was bustling with shoppers looking for Black Friday refuge. Sarah was run off her feet, her mind a whirlwind of coffee orders and pie slices. Around 2 p.m., a man in a sharp, expensive-looking wool coat walked in. He was clearly not a local. He had the brisk, purposeful air of a city dweller. He bypassed the waiting customers and walked straight to the counter. "Excuse me," he said, his voice polite but firm. "I'm looking for someone. I was told he sometimes comes in here." "A lot of people come in here," Sarah said, balancing 3 plates on her arm. The man pulled a photograph from his inside pocket. It was old and faded, a picture of a younger, clean-shaven man with startlingly clear blue eyes, standing proudly next to a complex-looking blueprint. He was smiling, his arm around a beautiful woman with a radiant smile. Sarah's breath caught in her chest. It was Arthur, a version of Arthur from another life, a life before the grief and the cold stone steps. It was him and, she knew instantly, his Eleanor. "His name," the man said, "is Arthur Penhaligon." Before Sarah could respond, the bell on the door chimed. And there, standing in the doorway, shaking the wet snow from his jacket, was Arthur himself. The man in the coat turned. His professional demeanor dissolved into something softer, a look of profound relief. "Arthur?" he said, his voice cracking slightly. "My God, it's you!" Arthur froze. He stared at the man, his face a canvas of confusion, then recognition, then a deep, weary dread. He looked like he was about to turn and bolt. "Arthur, wait," the man said, taking a step forward. "My name is David Gable. I'm the CEO of Sterling Toy Company. My father, Thomas Gable, was your partner. He searched for you for years." The diner had gone quiet. Everyone was watching. Sarah stood frozen behind the counter, the plates on her arm forgotten. "Your designs," Gable continued, his voice thick with emotion. "The Starlight Express, the Wonder Wheel, the Clockwork Menagerie, they're classics, Arthur. The patents are expiring. We, the company, the world, we want to bring them back for a new generation. But we need you. We couldn't do it without the original creator's blessing." He gestured vaguely. There's a trust, Arthur. All your royalties. They've been collecting interest for 30 years. It's a substantial amount of money. We couldn't find you after Eleanor passed. You just vanished." Arthur looked pale, overwhelmed. He wasn't looking at Gable, he was looking at Sarah. His gaze fell on a new drawing Leo had taped to the counter that Mornina detailed colorful picture of the Starlight Express with the words, "For Mom's Friend Art," written in a child's careful scrawl. He looked at Sarah's worn-out shoes, at the exhaustion that never quite left her eyes. He saw the $17 in tips, the unbought birthday present, the bus ticket that never arrived. He saw the plate of meatloaf she'd brought him in the cold, the countless cups of coffee, the quiet dignity she had offered him when no one else would even meet his eye. He saw the little wooden bird he'd carved, a symbol of a kindness that had kept his own hope from freezing solid. This wasn't about the money, it wasn't about the fame or the company or the patents. It was about the choice to step back into a world that had forgotten him or to stay in the shadows. But the shadows were lonely. Sarah had shown him that. Gable held his breath, waiting. The entire diner seemed to be holding its breath. For Arthur, this moment wasn't just about reclaiming a past, it was about validating a present. It was about the power of one small, consistent act of goodness. Could this moment, this one, act to right everything they believed about life and loss? Arthur took a slow breath. He looked away from Sarah and finally met David Gable's anxious gaze. "All right, David," he said, his voice steady and clear, resonating through the silent diner. "Let's talk." The 24 hours that followed weren't a fairy tale transformation filled with limousines and mansions. The real change was quieter, deeper, and infinitely more meaningful. Arthur didn't vanish into a new life of luxury. Instead, he brought his new life to the people who had reminded him how to live. After a long meeting with David Gable, the first person he sought out was Sarah. He found her at the bus stop, waiting in the evening chill just as she always did. He wasn't wearing rags anymore. Gable had taken him to get a new coat, a warm, dark wool that fit him properly. But in his hands, he held the same tattered leather satchel he always carried. He sat down next to her on the bench. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "I'm not going anywhere," he said finally. "I mean, I'll have a roof over my head, a proper one, but I'm not leaving this town, not leaving my friends." He opened the old satchel. Inside, nestled among yellowed papers, was a small, dusty box. He pulled it out and handed it to her. "This is for Leo," he said. "It's the original prototype for the Starlight Express. I made it for Eleanor one Christmas. It's the very first one." Sarah opened the box. Inside, a beautifully crafted, hand-painted locomotive sat on a small piece of track. It was a work of art, a piece of history, filled with love and memory. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring the cheerful lights of the diner across the street. "Arthur, You fed me when I was hungry, Sarah," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he no longer tried to hide. "But you did more than that. You saw me. You reminded a forgotten man that he was still there." Life didn't magically become perfect, but it became better. Arthur, with a quiet grace, made sure of it. He set up an educational trust for Leo, ensuring the boy would have every opportunity he deserved. He helped Sarah find a new apartment, one with a spare room and a porch swing in a quiet neighborhood with big oak trees. He didn't just give her money, he gave her stability, a safety net woven from his second chance. He became the grandfather Leo had never known and the father figure Sarah had always needed. The Silver Spoon Diner got a new, silent partner who made sure the heat always worked and that Sal could afford to give his only waitress a much-deserved raise and health insurance. Months later, on a crisp autumn afternoon, Sarah sat on her new porch swing, a steaming mug of coffee in her hands. The scent of fallen leaves filled the air. From inside, she could hear the happy rumble of Leo's laughter as he and Arthur worked on a new, elaborate track layout for the Starlight Express, covering the entire living room floor. Arthur was teaching him about gears and tension, about how to build worlds. She looked at her hands, no longer chapped and raw from the diner's harsh soap. She thought of the cold bus stop, the $17 in tips, the desperate ache of a mother's worry. It felt like a lifetime ago. It had all started with a simple plate of meatloaf, an act of kindness so small it felt insignificant at the time. But it hadn't been insignificant, it had been everything. It was the first stone that starts an avalanche of hope, the single spark that pushes back a universe of darkness. It was proof that you can't always fix a person's whole life, but you can be the one thing that helps them want to fix it themselves. What if your smallest kindness became someone else's reason to keep going? Has kindness ever changed your life? Tell us in the comments your story might inspire our next video. This story is a work of fiction or dramatized for entertainment purposes. While it may be inspired by real human emotions and events, all characters, names, and situations are either entirely fictional or modified for storytelling. This content fully complies with YouTube's community guidelines and is intended to inspire, not mislead.